Sustainable customizations. That's the key phrase of the day. And in a way, many of you have probably seen me stand on a stage very similar to this in the past and tell you that SuperOffice CRM Web, for example, is the most extensible CRM platform on the planet. Am I right?
Yep.
So in a way, I'm inadvertently responsible for actually causing some pain when it comes to sustainable customizations, because I tell you all about the things that it's capable of doing, all of the things that you can do. Controls here, labels there, archive providers here, tabs here, all that stuff. And then come to find out, when you try and move your applications into the cloud, that becomes a little bit more difficult. So in a way, I'm sorry. In another way, I'm kind of not, because I kind of like working in the upper areas of the ladder. So my main focus, nearly, well, 95% of the time, when I actually get to focus, is to work on the external APIs and the internal APIs and share information that I know and learn from the developers inside R&D with everyone in the community. So I remember, I like the way that Gutham likes to kind of look back. So I remember back in 2006 when I started at SuperOffice, this is what the API real estate looked like. At the time, I started, it was January 2006, and I had a colleague of mine, his name was Gisela Osberg. And he was basically my mentor and getting me up to speed with the SuperOffice APIs as I learned about SuperOffice. I had never heard about it before. And we had such a great working relationship. You know, questions would come into the forums and we would race to see who could answer it first, because that's what we did. And back at the time, I think 98% of the questions that came in was about VB scripts and automation inside the Windows client. Every now and then, you get some juicy stuff like the COM API. You know, fantastic stuff when someone would ask a question about the application interface and how I could, automate tabs flipping and things like that inside the Windows client. Ooh, yeah, that was a good day. Nowadays, a lot of the focus is on NetServer. And the more and more I think about it in my mind, it seems like every month goes by and there's a new piece of the puzzle that's added. And over time it just gets scrambled and there's a lot of noise because you can do a lot at the NetServer layer. You can pretty much override almost anything and everything, and interfaces at every level of the stack so that you can inject data. And I like working at that level, but over the course of several years, the real estate for extensibility has exploded. So, whereas me and Gisela used to sit in the office, wait for a question to come in on the forums, and race to answer it, nowadays, it's almost like a question comes in on the forums, and I'll see you in a couple days when I finally have an answer. Because there's a lot of complexity, there's a lot of layers to work through, and some of the questions in the past, if we go back 2 years ago, before there was archive extenders and you had to create 5 different archive providers just to be able to make sure that your one field you wanted associated with sales popped up all over the place, that was a huge investment in order, time-wise, to be able to try and explain that was even more expensive. So yeah, the more and more we get moving towards sustainable customizations, the more and more we want to tell you about it's time to start pushing things up. So whereas today you're probably operating at this layer when you're doing these intense integrations, creating archive providers, archive extenders, plugins, NDO plugins, all sorts of things. It's really becoming more and more complicated in order to maintain that code, and it's impossible to put that up into the cloud. Because when you're going to be building plugins, whether it's a document plugin, a Sentry plugin, an archive extender, MDO provider, those sort of things, it's impossible to put those into the cloud. It just doesn't work. We do not allow anybody to compile DLLs and put those off into the website. Has never happened, it will never happen, forget about it. So you saw earlier today, Mark, just recently, Savada, in the last session, talked about creating better tools. And he was showing you how we're improving tools in order to make things much better, much easier in order to work with our existing applications and move away from those complex tasks. Being able to aggregate data from multiple sources and bring that in. Now those things are capable inside CRM script, and you can even do those things online. So when it comes to settings and workflow, these are the UI workflow type areas that you can build integrations, or at least not things that are not out of the box. And of course, we want you to move closer towards web services, even if you're writing code in an on-site installation. You can take advantage of SOAP and REST. Even webhooks work in on-site installations. Connectors and database mirroring, these are things that are in online specific, but I'll get to that in a little bit. I remember Gupton came to me a couple months ago and he says, probably one of the most common questions I get from customers and newer people that are trying to, looking to become partners, they're like, does SuperOffice even have an API? We just look at each other and kind of laugh. Because it's like, where do you start? The question we have to sort of turn that around is, well, what is your platform? What technologies are you working with? Those sort of things, so that we can tell you and give you guidance in terms of which direction to go. What applications or what extensibility points are that you want to take advantage of in your solutions. So looking at this, for on-site capabilities, you have an extensible amount of capabilities. You can pretty much take advantage of that web client, and I'll come back to it, and I will say it's true. I'm not lying to you when I say SuperOffice CRM Web is the most extensible CRM platform on the planet, because it is. You can do pretty much virtually anything you want with that application in an on-site installation. Service settings, configuration. Service settings, these things allow you to do things like CRM scripting and triggers, and Svata did a fantastic job of showing you the work that he's done in the last year in order to make those things easier. Net server, service events, these are fragile in an on-site installation. Not because they'll break, but because they won't migrate easily. So, even for on-site installations, you're going to continue to hear this over and over and over for sustainable customizations. The more integrations you're doing, if you can get by without writing something locally that you have to drop inside the SuperOffice bin directory, no binaries, we're going to advocate that. Work with webhooks. Work with the web service layer. If you're writing code and you need to do some sort of synchronization, integration, do it at the services layer. Even for quote and ERP sync. When it comes to the SuperOffice deployment schedule, we hear this all the time, new releases every few weeks. This came up in the Q&A this morning with Gautam and Gisla. It's a pain, because when you write those plugins, integrations, override the interfaces, then when SuperOffice deploys a new version, the mindset is that, well, I need to get my hands on those binaries sooner so I can recompile those and deploy them with the new SuperOffice installation. And if you don't do anything to mitigate that, your applications, your plugins are not going to work. Okay, so the most common problem you see here is, SuperOffice is running in a specific context. It's got a newer version of SO Core, SO Database, SuperOffice plugins, And those have specific versions. And so when you try to upgrade your SuperOffice and you have an assembly that's compiled with the older version of the SuperOffice, SuperOffice DLLs, then you're going to get this loader exception. And you're like, why? Well, you're probably going to feel like this, going to be a little bit angry, a little bit frustrated. Why is SuperOffice not giving us access to these assemblies earlier so that we can recompile and test? It's because the problem, or the solution, has been here all along. So this documentation, this document is probably 5 years old. It came out there when 7.5 was released. And basically what it's teaching you is telling you that you want to be using bind-in redirects. What this basically says here, let's see if I can get this to work, is, mouse? No, forget about it. It's going to say that whenever you put this in a web config file or an application configuration file for SuperOffice and say, if any of the assemblies that I run into are of an earlier version, forget that. Use this new version instead, which is what SuperOffice has, right? It's always the newest version. So basically what I wanted to do is show you a real-world example of this in action and show you just how easy it is in order to make sure that your integrations that are using our interfaces, which don't change, we've been really, really good at that for many years, your applications will still work. Let me switch over here to Visual Studio. Okay. All right. Please bear with me, it's all going to be live demos. I have a archive browser here. Archive browser is an application that was created by Dr. Mark Rukak. And basically, what it does is, when it starts up, it will look into that SuperOffice assemblies that it's running with and discover all of the archive providers, all of the MDO providers that are available, and make those available for you to query against, so you can query into the database. So I'm just going to go ahead and run this and give you a glimpse of what it does. So I have a login screen, on the wrong screen, over here. Pretty simple. Just going to go ahead and log in. Basically, it's a nice little helper dialog that saves all the settings in the config file. And this is what it's like. Engineering. He is an engineer at heart. And you can see this. So basically, what I have here is a list of all of the archive providers that this application discovered by searching for all classes that implement the archive provider interface. Now I've selected one here called Find Sale, and I'll explain why in a minute. But if I scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see the last ones that I have is quote, version, alternative, quote line, etc. There's nothing else there, that's the last line. So what I want to do is, as a developer, I want to create an archive provider that extends this capability, that extends, anytime I see sales in the application, I want to be able to add in my own two fields, my sale ID, my sale name, whatever. So let's go ahead and do that. So inside the solution, I have an a DLL project, just a simple application here. And inside there, let's see, I've made references to old assemblies. If we take a look at the versions here, just going to extend on properties, sorry about that. You'll see that it was compiled with SuperOffice version 8.2. The versions that the archive browser is running in, let me just open up, I believe I used packages for this one. So I got the latest packages. So for this one I'm using version 8.4. Alright, so in my application here, my references, SuperOffice, there should be, no, okay. This is not the way that you work with this, right? Quick reminders to self, inside the app config, if I want to load in my assembly, then I want to go ahead and put this into the dynamic load section of the config file. If I go down a little bit, dynamic load, you'll see here's my DLL. I'll go ahead and just uncomment this. I'm going to make sure I recompile my DLL, which also, by the way, is compiling with Target Framework 4.51. So let's go ahead and build that. Open the file, in the folder, as you would. I'll grab that build. I'll just copy and paste this into the archive browser's bin directory. Boom. Now it's already there, so I'll probably just have to rewrite one. Deleted it, good. Okay. So then I want to go ahead and start the archive browser again. SuperOffice this time is going to detect that I actually have something loaded in the dynamic load section. Waiting on this login dialog. Bringing up the archive browser. Now I'm still on find sale. So if I scroll down to the bottom, you'll see that same field as last time. Nothing has changed. Now, what happens when SuperOffice discovers that there's assembly declared inside the dynamic load section? It's going to say, oops, there's a new assembly there. Let's go ahead and load it. It loads it, and there's no problem loading it. It will be loaded into the current app domain. But as soon as it calls get types, it's going to explode. The SuperOffice doesn't want, or NetServer doesn't want to blow up just because one, dynamic load archive provider wasn't, functional enough for it to run. So it just sort of ignores it in a try catch, right? And just goes on about its merry way. And then it allows you to continue to work. However, that's not what we want to happen. We want to be able to go ahead and say, you know what? Even though I have an assembly inside this archive browser solution, I'm going to load it up in dynamic load, regardless of the previous version that it was compiled with, let it run. Just go ahead and let it run. So inside the app config file, we'll come down to where you would specify inside the runtime element, where you're going to specify your assembly bindings, right here. Just going to go ahead and uncomment this code. And basically what it says is for SuperOffice, anytime you detect something that depends on SO core, SO database, pretty much any version through 8.3, go ahead and instead just use version 8.4, which is what's currently running. So, okay, if I save that, I'm going to go ahead and start it up. Let's see what happens this time. I got my login dialog. Just to kind of show you who I am. My archive browser window. Take a big gulp. Go down to the bottom, and there's my fields. There's the fields for my sale ID. That's how you get older versions of assemblies to load into newer versions of SuperOffice. No other word. Is there anybody that's doing that in their applications already? All right, I'm sorry if I bored you. I'm glad that you're not asleep yet. This is what you need to do. As SuperOffice is going to continue to roll out new versions every few weeks and on site a little bit longer, these are the things that you want to basically adopt. These are the behaviors that you want to adopt inside your build pipeline to make sure that those things work. If you look inside a web installation's web config file, now it basically says, it puts those in there for you. So any web installation should just work. You'll see any version from 0.0.0.0 all the way through 65,000 something. It's going to say any of these versions, go ahead and map it to that current version of SuperOffice. Okay, so we try to help you as much as possible when we can. Useful? Okay. Okay, when it comes to online, you can see that all of the really juicy bits of extensibility have now been grayed out. You don't have access to the assemblies. You can't put in NetServer service scripts so that you can be notified like you can now with webhooks. Instead, webhooks is out there. Has anybody tried working with webhooks yet? 1, 2, fantastic. Right. So now you can tell in an online environment a significant amount of work is being put into ensuring that the tooling becomes better and more efficient so you can do some pretty serious integrations, sustainable customizations inside the applications without having to depend on assembly distribution. Inside the online environment, we also, I got to mention this, the database mirroring. This is also a bit of a fragile thing because the scheme is always changing, and if you're writing SQL code, and you have to write SQL code against these mirror databases because our proxies and our assemblies just won't work against them, right? You don't have the context that NetServer requires. You got to write SQL code or use some other database code generator in order to work with the table that we give you. But then again, it's going to be a little bit fragile because, as you know, with CDD, we're creating all these new capabilities, and so we're changing the database schema using the continuous database functionality that we've deployed last year. Or actually with version 8.1, sorry. Right. And just on that note, anybody deploying new tables, schema changes via the CDD capability? All right, there's a few of you. That's good. I would appreciate it hearing your feedback about it and what you really think about it later this evening or tomorrow. I'm really kind of curious to see what you think about that, especially versus your capabilities with extra tables, extra fields, and those sort of things. More on that in a few minutes. With online development, we have been embracing standards. So in the last couple of years, a significant amount of work has been invested in order to bring together OAuth 2 into online. Anybody working with applications that use OAuth 2? Significant amount. At least a third of you. So that's pretty cool. We've also adopted OpenID Connect as well, because while OAuth 2 is more for the authentication aspect of it, it doesn't provide much in terms of identity. So we want to be able to provide more identity functionality for you as well. And so we've based our OAuth 2 implementation on top of OpenID Connect. With, if we go back, and you'll see a majority of the documentation that I wrote and Christian Mogensen helped write when it came to SuperOffice authentication. A couple of years ago, we would stand up here and say, we've got this thing that will give you JWT tokens. It kind of looks like OAuth, it sort of feels like OAuth, and therefore it's probably like OAuth as far as you're concerned. So we would ask you to send off, clients. If you're going to sign in, use the superoffice.com/login URL. Tell us your application ID for an online application, and then we'll present the user with a consent dialog if he's never logged in before, him or her, and then clicks on, okay, I consent that this application can access my database. And then what we would send back to you in your application's redirect URL would be this JOT, this JWT security token. Now, that's kind of OAuth-ish. And if you use the SuperOffice online libraries, you can go ahead and validate it. And once validated, then you can cast it or extract it via this SuperOffice ID token data type. And it contains claims, which OAuth has. And then we'll tell you some additional properties specifically about this. One key property I want to highlight here is ticket. Ticket's a very important property because basically it's your access to the database. That, your application identifier, your application secret, and your ticket. You have those pieces of information and you're in. Also, most importantly, is the NetServer URL and the system token. System token was kind of the bane of my existence trying to explain the complexities involved in order to do server-to-server communications using our OAuth-ish type API. Okay? It's not straightforward. People are like, well, what is system token? I say, well, it's kind of like a refresh token. You know, you can use this thing in order to exchange it for a system ticket, like this user ticket, that then when your client ID, your client secret, you can access the database at the, or via the API, the website URL, web services URL. So, yeah, it's OAuth-ish. Well, come to find out, you know, when everybody comes up and they get more intelligent than the rest of us, and they say, well, you know, I'm using OpenID Connect, and I'm trying to set my client options. How do I set my client options so that it works with this? Turns out it's not very easy. In fact, it's impossible. So now, with your applications, we want you to use a URL like this. So it's login/common/OAuth. And anybody familiar with OAuth will understand that authorize endpoint. There's 3 endpoints in OAuth: authorize, tokens, and user endpoint. User is optional, and we don't use it, by the way. But authorize will accept response type. It will accept client ID, which is your application ID, and a redirect URL. Now you can specify a redirect URL in the old URL as well, but you can explicitly set it here as well, and as long as it's in our whitelist, you've told us it's okay to send people to this one, we'll accept it. Okay, so what we do with this one, when a user successfully logs in and he gives consent for that application to access that tenant's database, he'll get back a real JOT, a real OAuth OpenID Connect, actually, JOT, security token. It contains an identity token. This contains the same claims as the Super ID token would, except now you no longer have that SO credentials ticket because you don't need it, because we're giving you an access token, which is really what you want. And then you can use the access token for making bearer requests in both our REST API and SOAP API. That SOAP API, that capability has never been there before, but it is being released when we put out 8.4 release 03, which, is Helena here? It's going to be in the next couple of weeks, by the end of the month, I believe. Okay. I want to demo. I really want to demo this capability. And then, in addition to that, you get back a refresh token. One of the most common requests I get from people is, how do I use our OpenID Connect implementation in order to do server-to-server communications? And that's just not possible, because we only utilize authorized code grant, the hybrid, the 3 main ones. There's no client certificates or anything like that. So you have to have user interaction. There has to be some sort of user there that gets redirected to the login. If he's already logged in, he'll just get that single sign-on experience. If not, he'll have to log in, give consent if not already given, and he's in. But now he's going to get back a refresh token. So the other most common question is, how can I actually do impersonation in online? And using the SOAP proxies, that's just not possible. You can do that on NetServer core if you're on-premise and in a domain and you're writing like core DLLs and you have that capability. You can do impersonation really simply, but you can't do it in online. If you get refresh tokens though, these are for specific users. They come back in their authorization request. They get that refresh token back. That application, your application, can store that refresh token on behalf of that user. And then if you have a system process in the background that requires server-to-server communications without any user interaction whatsoever, you just lift up that user's refresh token, exchange it for an access token, and you're go on your merry way. Pretty cool? All right, let's go ahead and take a quick demo at OpenID Connect. I'm going to go ahead and use Visual Studio Code for this one. And yeah, let's go ahead and just, let's create a new folder. All right. You know what? Actually, no. Let's not do it like this. I want to go ahead and use Visual Studio. Okay. So, here we go. Now basically, I'm sorry if I'm going to bore you here for a minute. Just going to start out a new project. I'm going to go ahead and just create a console application, .NET Framework. Let's go ahead and call it Expand World Framework. Let's make that 471. It's a bit of a preview. Okay. So inside this one, I'm going to go ahead and install a package. And there's a little bit of a hint here. I want to go ahead and take a look at Expand World and the identity model, the OpenID Connect client that's used or was created by guys over at Identity Model. So OIDC. The OIDC client. Now this is going to go ahead out, it's going to go talk to NuGet, it's going to get me a whole bunch of libraries. But basically what I want to show you is that I can take their example here, and I'm just going to copy this whole class. In fact, I'm going to copy the rest of the file. It has a little bit of console works going on in there. I'll just go ahead and paste that in here. No, I don't want that code. No. Don't. I want to walk through some of these things. I'm going to have to resolve some assemblies here once everything's loaded. But basically, I'm instantiating an instance of this console application. It's calling the sign-in method, and it's just going to sit there and read the key, wait for me to type something in. Now, the key thing about this application is that this is what we want people to do when they're writing phone applications, mobile applications, as well as Windows applications. There are a lot of other frameworks that are out there that, if you write Microsoft.NET applications, you're usually using .NET Core. Lots of examples out there on how to use an OpenID connector out there. We actually even have one that's up on our GitHub page. So it's github.com/SuperOffice. There is a .NET Core example up there that shows you how to authenticate using OpenID Connect. But what's key about this one is that this is using native app, OAuth native app implementation. And basically what that means is we're going to instantiate an HTTP listener. And that HTTP listener is going to wait for callbacks from the server that we're going to call. And that's what we're doing right here on this line 33. Instantiate an HTTP listener. We're going to set it up on this redirect URL. And it's very important that you understand what that redirect URL is doing. Notice this. It's going to a loopback address on a very specific port. This is the recommended way in order to do this. This is according to the OAuth spec. Really quickly, I'm going to go back over here, new tab, go and look at when you do an application registration. Down at the bottom, we're asking you if you are going to be creating a Windows or a web app. If you choose Windows or a phone app, you actually don't necessarily have to specify a redirect URL. There's two cases here. One is you're going to use the native app workflow that I'm about to show you. The other one is if you are using our older library. It's not old, we're actually still using it, the SuperOffice online.win client DLL, or it's actually a NuGet package. You use this, you try and log in, it will throw open a dialog to the SuperOffice or SuperID login page. User logs in, and then you get a callback. And in there, you can specify a callback URL. Very specifically, it escapes me at the moment, but it's actually not a URL. For this one, if you're going to choose phone app or Windows app, you don't even have to specify a redirect URL, because it has to be 127.0.0.1 colon a port. And we don't care about the port because inside the Operations Center, we have, we'll just use a regular expression that says, okay, we'll accept this loopback address and then any port that you specify. Okay, coming back to the code. We're going to create this listener. It's going to start the listener. And then here we have to specify some client options. So these client options are specific to the library that we're using from identity model. So let me go ahead and just resolve some of these dependencies. And for this one specifically, I got to cheat because I'm a big cheater. Let's go ahead on the desktop. I got a little file here I'm going to use. They contain my settings. So I'm just going to override this one. And you'll see, all I'm doing is just saving a little bit of typing time because I'm putting in my client ID and the SuperOffice specific settings. So these are those client options I was telling you about. People are asking about in our old OAuth 2 workflow, how could I specify client credentials or client options? You really couldn't. We didn't support that at the time. Now we do. So you specify your client ID. Here I'm specifying a client in secret, and I'm not scared to share this with you right now because this application only works for my user. I have an explicit authorization on this one. Nobody will ever be able to use it. Okay, Jens? Okay. Okay, for the scope, it's going to be OpenID, and OpenID is the only scope that we currently support. We don't do anything else, but I'm just going to add this in here to show you that it doesn't hurt to add in any other scopes that you might support. My redirect URL, again, I'm specifying the loopback address with this port, and then / desktop callback. And that's actually how I've registered it inside the Operations Center. So if you want to specify us with a path after the port number, by all means do that so that you can keep it straight in your head. It's going to be of type response mode form post, and the flow is going to be the hybrid flow. Now, 2 additional lines here that I'm putting in that are not, we don't actually support at the moment, but we are going to begin implementing some of this stuff, is to validate the issuer name. and also to require the access token hash. The hash, the way that we provide it, is not necessarily the way that this library expects it, so I basically just have to turn that function off. It doesn't mean that anything else here is going to be invalid or anything like that. It's just an additional layer on top of a check that this library does. I'm going to simply ignore that. Next, I'm going to instantiate the actual OpenID Connect client library from Identity Model. I'm going to go ahead and call off on that prepare login async method that it implements and wait for the state. When the state comes back, I'm basically going to say that it has the information that I expect. I get the request post data back, and this is the JOT that's coming back from SuperOffice. So this is my security token. Actually, sorry about that. Yeah, well, it contains a lot of things, and we're going to go ahead and go through that. But I'll pass that response, get the output stream. Also, one thing to note here is this response string. You can set this to anything you want. And I'm going to show you what that actually means. And I do have an implementation of a different one that I have here. Just want to go ahead and copy this in. This is what's going to be rendered in the browser after I authenticate. So I'm going to go ahead and just put that in. It's just a markup. It goes into the body of the browser. Okay, call that off, get the output stream, read that out, and then process the response. When I get the result is what comes back from SuperOffice. This is the JOT security token. Inside there, as long as everything succeeded successfully, I'm going to have a user property, I'm going to have the claim, I can loop through the claims, I'm going to have the access token, and I'm also going to have the refresh token. So you don't even have to think about the dance that the client is doing for you. Basically going off, sending off your data to the authorize endpoint, getting back a token ID, a token, or an authorization code. It's using the hybrid flow in this way, so you wouldn't get that. But then it has to call back to the tokens URL, get back the tokens, and now you have the identity token, access token, and refresh token. So all the client's doing a lot of that for you. So with any luck, if I don't have any other build errors here, if I've resolved everything, I got to come down here. There's some console-specific capabilities here because I'm running in a console application. So I'm just going to go ahead and include that. All right, let's just F6 this, make sure everything builds successfully. There are some other additional capabilities that I want to talk about. Why we want you to do it this way. All right, the get logo thing. I got this great logo. You guys are going to love it. And no, my name is not Trump. All right. There we go. File the system I know. Let's go. One more time. All right, build succeeded. So I'm going to execute this. It's going to go ahead and instantiate this application. It's going to wait for me to actually do something. It's going to put that output, say, sign in and a key. So now it's going to go ahead and set up that HTTP listener. Here I'm going to go ahead and set up my client options. And I got this exception. Okay, nothing to worry about. This is a assembly bind-in redirect issue. How do I know that? Well, when I added in that library for Identity Model's OIDC client, it had quite the list of dependencies. You know, that's why it took quite a long time to download. But you can see a lot of this Microsoft and system assembly is being 4.30. Oops. If I look at like diagnostic source, for example, 430 there as well. But then if I go in my application configuration and I look at system runtime, system diagnostics, those are all 4.120. So let's go ahead and just change these and say, okay, every single time you encounter a library that has this dependency, let's just go ahead and redirect that to 4.3.0. Nobody ever said that NuGet was smooth sailing. Let's try that again. Okay, console's running over here. Move that over. Enter. Sets up the listener, waiting for the response. Here it goes off and it sends my information to SuperOffice. I'm not logged in at this point, but you can see it does send up some context. Don't want to get into that right now. Basically saying, okay, I want to log in, allow this application to access my data. So let me go ahead and with any luck, if I remember who I am, that's not it. I can go ahead and log in. I'm going to use this new login experience. New login experience, in extremely layman's terms, allows me to have multiple tenants, and I can choose which one I'm going to log in. It's centralized SuperOffice user identity. Close enough, Jens? Close enough. Okay. All right. So now you can see in my response, I got back this big old line of gibberish. This is my JOT. And then if I come down farther, you can see the list of claims that were inside here. The library that I use knows how to validate this thing. I don't even have to worry about validation as long as my certificate's already in place, which I won't bore you with how that was done here. And then I get back my access token, and here's my refresh token. And what's interesting about this at this point is that I've authenticated using native API or native app workflow without being hosted in another system. It opened up my default browser, went to superoffice.com. I had to log in. I logged in. After that login was successful, it stores a cookie. Now, if I have any other applications that use that same workflow, native app ID, when it goes up and it shoots open a browser and it's going to forward off that context information to SuperOffice, it knows that I'm already authenticated because it's already authenticated to me in that browser. So that browser already has a session available, a cookie available to validate that that user's logged in. So it has access to what's commonly referred to as the cookie jar. So it grabs that cookie, knows about it, and you're going to get a single sign-on experience. That's a huge benefit to using the SuperOffice Online Win Client Library, because anytime you open up another application, do an authentication in there, it's hosted within that context. Regardless if you write a cookie, that cookie is associated with that application, not SuperOffice. So you're never going to get a single sign-on or a smooth experience. Ever heard of an application called WebTools? WebTools uses superoffice.online.win-client-library and therefore suffers from the same experience. We have good news, is that the latest version of SuperOffice Online Win Client actually provides the new native app capability. So if you're using the native app or the SuperOffice Online Win Client NuGet package today, next week you'll be able to download the new version that incorporates and uses native app ID. So it will open up your default browser. You'll authenticate that way, and then any of your other applications that run in the background will have that single sign-on experience that are using that same browser window. Okay? Complicated? Trust me, it just works. Okay. I want to take this one step further. Yeah. Let's just end that. And show you a little preview to come. So in the next version of SuperOffice, 8.4 release 03, what I want to show you is I want to go ahead and add in a NuGet package of that version. So package manager. And I want to go directly to my hard drive because this is not out there in the public yet. So if I say install package, if I can spell package, SuperOffice, net server, dot services. I believe there's only one version, but let's just check. Yes. Is that the current release? 03? Let me just verify really quickly, sorry. Let's just steal this guy. NuGet.org, so that's SuperOffice Core. I just basically want to check, make sure that I'm not using this version, 6.8.50. I want something later than that, 6.8.65. Okay, that is R03. It's going to go ahead and modify my package. Yep. I know that when you install NuGet packages that we have some things running in the background that will modify your config file, and it's been a pain for me, so I will try and update that in the near future, just mention it now in passing. Sometimes it will wipe away those settings and I'll have to go back through and fix them. Here's a pretty good example. Remember all those 4.3 zeros we fixed? Sorry about that. Make sure I get the right version, 430. Take a deep breath and let's go. How are we doing on time?
50 minutes.
Okay. I think what I want to do is call off this demo here pretty short because I have a guest speaker and he has to leave really soon. Okay, I'm just going to set the services mode to remote. And then also I want to go ahead and add in some settings here for app config. This is going to go inside services. So as you know, when you're working against online, you need to specify an application token. And the default one is remote. Need to duplicate. Okay. And then for the code inside the project, what I want to go ahead and do is down here, after we get past the claims, we get the refresh token. What I wanted to show you is that I'm just going to go ahead and get the customer context value. I'm going to go ahead and get the net server URL. I'm going to enter in a database context using that customer context. I'm going to set up my remote base URL with the one that I got from the token. Token. And then I wanted to authenticate using the SO session authenticate method. But I'll just go ahead and show you, resolve the differences, that there are no compile problems. Just trust me that this one would work. Yeah. Well, just a minute to give it a whirl. Just going to continue on. asks me to log in. Now, I've already logged in, right? You didn't have to see me log in again. I used the same browser. I got that single sign-on experience. Got my little fancy logo up here. And then I'm stopped down here. Right, it's just waiting for me to continue. I'll just continue. And I didn't even stop to show you. Didn't hit the break point. Yeah. Anyways, I really do need to just continue on. But here's the thing. The reason why I wanted to demo this is because you do not have the capability to use access tokens in order to authenticate with the SuperOffice proxies today. If you're using the SuperOffice proxies today, we're telling you that you have to still use the old way to authenticate in order to get access to that ticket, because you can only authenticate using the proxies using a ticket until the next release. In the next release, we're giving you the capability to use your favorite OpenID Connect library, get back access tokens, identity tokens, and use that access token to authenticate, establish the SuperOffice session in context, and continue going with your applications. That's the path forward. That's sustainable customizations, and that's using the standards. I'll come back to skin. Okay, with online evolutions, application evolutions, this whole zipper effect, we're trying to bring more of the service capabilities available through NetServer web services and also our web API. So there's a new CRM script agent out there that allows you to actually create CRM scripts and work with your CRM scripts. There's only a couple different methods here we want you to focus on in the immediate future. That's the create default CRM script entities. And then you can also get a script using the CRM script ID, which is the database ID for that script. You're going to see some other methods up there using these unique identifiers. And I'm telling you right now, just don't worry about that right now, because we're saving this for the whole SuperOffice 2020 and the future versions, where scripts are stored in a single repository where one script can be used by multiple tenants in online. So that's sort of, we're using this forward thinking about these things. So they are in the interfaces, but the implementations today, you're only going to want to focus on these methods that are highlighted using CRM script IDs. Now, I want to introduce you Dr. Hugh Song. He works with Syntef. He's working with SuperOffice together with Visma, working on this project. You may have heard of it, called Sirius. It's about SuperOffice 2020 and putting custom code in the cloud. And a lot of our focus in building sustainable customizations have to deal with this. So come on stage, Dr. Hugh Song.
Hear me? Yeah. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, as you can see, I'm not from SuperOffice. It's not difficult to see because I got a shirt that's not really my size. I'm from Syntef, which, by the way, is neither a customer nor a partner of SuperOffice. So some of you could pass the message to the people in the next door. There might be some business opportunity, our competitor. So, as Tony said, we are in a research project called Series. As a research project, we want to try to see something for the future. And here, one of the topics is what will be the customization in the future. So we believe that customization is also development. So you write scripts. Some of the scripts could be very long, and some of the projects may have several scripts here and there. And what are the new way of custom software development? Now there are many people talking about DevOps. This we can say that is agile, but is put in a more extreme way, that you keep planning and implementing your new ideas and try to put it immediately into your product to expose it to your end user. I think that's the way that many of you as SuperOffice partners may want to have in some of the situations. Like if you suddenly receive a call from a customer, want a special, not necessarily very big, but new feature, then you probably want to have it immediately exposed to your user. And there are many big software companies, especially those that are running web-based systems like Facebook, like Netflix. They are using DevOps. They are practicing DevOps for many years. And there are lots of tools behind it to guarantee that you can do up to like 50 release every day. And one of those tools is that all the practices that you have to have all your code traceability or traceable, that you see all the versions you have and what you have changed. And if you want to roll back to a previous commit, you have the whole change in the package so that you don't need to go to the files one by one to just roll back it manually. And those are the things that are currently not there in the online editor, as you probably are familiar with the current SuperOffice CRM script. And that's why we, as a research project, want to see what are the possibilities here. And as you have seen that Tony has shown the API, the endpoint, that you can manipulate the scripts because they are nothing more than some entities in the database. So you have the APIs to read, write, execute them. So on top of these APIs, we try to bring you a prototype of full-function IDE. This IDE based on Visual Studio Code, which is open source and cross-platform development environment. And by the way, it is ranked as most popular development environment by Stack Overflow. And even as a first version of a prototype, we have managed some of the interesting features. I don't want to read them one by one. We can go directly to the live demo. Here, let's start with Studio Code. That's the wonderful demo from Tony. I have to close this. Sorry, Tony. No, that's Visual Studio, not Visual Studio Code. This is supposed to be the right one. Can open my extension. Now this is still Visual Studio Code, and now I have to install my extension into it. You will see a new Visual Studio Code in a few seconds. Take some time. Yes, it's here, but in the other screen. Here. No, we're still in the other screen. Good. Every time I drag, try to fit in the corner of the other screen. So this is the Visual Studio Code with the CRM script extension. Now I want to work on the CRM scripts from this IDE. And the first thing I want to do is I need an environment. So I need to open a folder. Literally a folder in the OS. And now I'm in it. I have my own environment. It's a completely empty folder. Now I want to tell, I'll get the instruction. I need to do something first. But Where is the logo? Cool. Yes, but where's the slash?
Shift 7.
Ah. Yes, thank you. I'm used to the US layout, sorry. Cool. And I also have a file here to log in. Now I can switch back to my Visual Studio Code. Now I need to tell this environment that which tenant I'm going to develop against. Now I have prepared a file, if I can find my cursor. Here you see something you're probably familiar with. That's the thing. I need to restart my studio. Still the empty folder, and now you have something you're probably familiar with, that's the client ID and client secret. Those are things I suppose you can find it somewhere in the online system. To be honest, I don't know where, so I asked Tony to give me this. I guess you could do the same when you want to use this.
We'll talk more about that tomorrow in the app, how to build an online app session. First thing in the morning, 9 a.m.
Okay. Was that me? Yep, but so this code you can easily get somewhere, or you probably suddenly accidentally put it into Git. So those are not the things for authentication. So the next thing I need to do is that I have to ask SuperOffice whether I have the right to actually work on the script. Those are things supposed to be critical. So let's log in. And by the way, in Visual Studio Code, everything is in command. So there's a special hotkey, and there you can find some of the commands. And here, all the commands will show here is with a prefix called series. That's the name of the research project. And now I log in. In a few seconds, I should see a browser page. Yeah, it's coming. I'm not going to log in with Tony's account. I don't trust the ones remembered by the browser. So, login successful. All the thing behind this is exactly what you have seen before by the demo shown by Tony. So it asks for the open ID, get the token, and now the token is in this ID. In the very end of this ID, you see that now I'm logged in to customer called 23973. That's a secret name for Syntax. So now I have everything. I can start actually work on the scripts. First thing first, I want to see whether there are already some scripts in this tenant. So I need my command called download, aka let the scripts in. And they're here. You have some scripts, system scripts, you have some, I don't understand actually. But they're scripts, that's the only thing I understand. So just if you are curious whether they are actually the scripts by this Syntax tenant, we can double check this, if I remember the way to find them online. So ISOD is supposed to be slower than the product, right? So you see, those scripts are already here. And they are the same as you can see in your local space. Now you can be confident of working here. Now as an IDE, there are some built-in features. like I can do searching, and I have something which is called the highlight of syntax, and also some IntelliSense, which you will see later on. And now let's just search for a toy script that I'm the only script that I understand. I remember it starts with something called hello, which is a global search. And now I found, okay, there is a file called hello world.crm script. I go here, try to read it. It says, comes again. So we know now this is really a prototype. But don't worry. I just need to reboot. I probably need to log in again. Let's wait a little bit. Yes. See, I have to click to log in, and since I've already logged in the browser, now the second time I don't need to use my password again. Now let me download my scripts. Download. We can start try to work a little bit on this hello world script. But as a careful developer, I want to have all my changes checked so that if I make any mistake, I can still go back to the previous version. And there is built-in version control system by Visual Studio Code. You can here say that I want to put all the changes in the stage and commit them. You see from the code. That's the code that was in the tenant. Now we can start working a little bit. So this script, if I understand correctly, it tries to load the first 10 customers and try to say hello to each of them by name. I want to see whether my guess was correct. I can execute this, and there should be an output somewhere. Yes, that print. Actually, it crashed last night, so I was a bit nervous. Now, what I can play with it, so I can see that maybe it's boring to print just the names. I can hover my cursor here. Now it shows a document of this particular function, and you see that you can actually also get, for example, the email. So we try email. Save, and we can upload things, the change into the tenant. And before we see how it works, let's try some other changes, because it takes some time to upload. Now we can try to create a new script. The same way as creating a local file. Let's call it my script number 1. Script. Let me try again with customers, because I don't know anything else. I hate the layout. So see what I can try. So from customer, I see those are the methods I can call. So let me try find from email. That's mine. Here, yes. Sorry. Print line. C dot. Yeah, I remember this get value, and again, let's try to print my name. You can save this, upload all the changes to the current folder, from the current folder to the remote tenant. And here you can see that there is a new entity created with some limited information. And if we download, refresh all the information again, you can see that this one is properly created as an entity in the database. Just to double check, let's go online. That's my script already there. Now let's see whether it actually works. We can execute this again. Wait for a moment. Now it starts to print the email instead of the name. Now I have done my play, so I hope it should be somehow tracked somewhere. It says no changes. Oh, never mind. Maybe because I reopened it again. So that's what I tried, and the new file doesn't make any sense, so I can delete it, do synchronization again, and if I refresh here, it should be gone. So it goes to the prior state as it was before. So that's all I have now. It's the last message. Where is the PowerPoint? Next page.
Have you done something already?
Right. That's just the backup. How to, yeah. What's the next page? Yeah. So we have this in GitHub. You have all the source code there, and if you're interested, you can start using it. And you're more welcome to contribute to the code. I've already got some commit from the SuperOffice partners and some other people. So you're welcome to contribute, and you're welcome to try it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's great. Preferably, we would like to see more contributions rather than support tickets associated with this. But it's up there. It's freely available. It's obviously not a SuperOffice product. It's part of the Serious Research project. So it's in the public domain. Sorry. Now, I also want to highlight, while we're on the subject of CRM script, we had a fantastic contribution by none other than Frode Lidrode of Ganskelt, who pretty much uploaded a pretty significant size cache of CRM scripts that he uses as helper functions to support his integrations. And that you can find up on GitHub at github.com/superoffice/CRM script. So I highly recommend you check it out. If you want to learn more about what sustainable customizations are like for one of our longest running partners, please go ahead and see his session tomorrow at 11:30 on sustainable customizations. I have quite a bit of information to put through. How much time are you guys willing to spend more with me? Let me just go ahead and wrap this up as fast as I can. If you guys start walking out, by all means, do that. But if you're interested in learning more about what we have to offer and what's coming, then by all means, stick around. Service lists. When it comes to working with our APIs, there's the service capabilities, specifically working with categories, request statuses, and priorities. These things are quite complicated. They're complex structures that you see inside the interface. And we know that some applications, if you're going to be working with CRM scripts and you're working inside service a lot, you're creating custom applications or you're creating standard applications that's going to take advantage of some of these capabilities that we've now provided in our web services layer. You can now go ahead and provision service lists using our list agent. So go ahead and create default ticket categories, ticket priorities, ticket status entities. Go ahead and populate these data structures and then save them, and you can go ahead and provision them in an application that you need. While I'm here, I do want to note that there was a break and change. Because of the introduction of ticket status, we also, on the net server core layer, if you did any work with archive providers that used a enumeration called ticket status, we had to rename that due to other naming conflicts with the new capabilities. And so now you're going to find that called ticket base status. Okay? Just needed to put that out there. Again, you're working at the core. It's a bit of a fragile environment. Stay up as high as you can in the services layer, and it will protect you from these sort of things. Soft delete is obviously the capability now. When you delete people and companies inside SuperOffice, they're not really deleted. They're just sort of go on vacation in this little thing called a recycle bin. And this is the only place that you can see them. They're still in the database. The only thing is now we've populated their deleted date field inside the database. And if you want to see them, you can use the recycle bin that loads up an archive provider and gives me all contacts or people that have been deleted where the deleted date is populated, but also within a specific period. If you look inside the SuperOffice preferences inside system, you're going to find this new preference called retain deleted data, and by default this is set to 14 days. So what we have going on behind the scenes is a EJ cron job, or scheduled task that runs, and it will go ahead and get all of the, it will get this preference and say, okay, everybody within this time that's been deleted, permanently delete them. So every 14 days these people, if their deleted date's populated, it will delete them. You can manually invoke this capability yourself, only at the services layer. So using the web services API, call off on the deleted expired method for contact in person, and it will go ahead and basically invoke the same thing that would happen if this task was to run. We do not want you to go through and manually delete these people through the database. We really wish that you sort of use our workflow of managing people, right? If you absolutely positively have a case, an edge case, it's really got to be an edge case where you need to delete these people, send me an email. Really, we want you to work within this workflow because that's what our customers expect, that's what our users expect, that's what they're going to be used to working with. So please follow that same sort of workflow. Really quickly, I think this one solves a huge problem with a lot of people. Not the ERP sync thing. Eric talked about that a little bit earlier today, so I won't go into too much detail about it. Much better support for synchronization there. The RESTful API, we've got much better support for things like searching based on date time types, doing like after time, before time, on time, things like that. But also a huge thing is the patch. So now we support the patch keyword. Before, you would, if you wanted to make changes to a contact entity, you'd call off and get contact/3, you get back to contact, modify some of the properties, and then you'd put that back into through the API and save all those changes. But what if you only wanted to change a couple properties and that was it? If you wiped everything clean, and then you only added in those two properties and then put that back in the database, well, you would have deleted all of those other properties. Patch basically allows you to do a really short snippet to save just those two properties, any sort of properties that you want to, any number of properties. You don't have to do all like you had to before. Patch allows you to save just a couple. Moving on to person and contact address. Who likes to work with localized addresses in this room? Multi-dimensional arrays? Come on, guys, we're programmers. Easy peasy. All right, localized fields. Well, during the Zapier project, we have to sort of teach programmers that are doing the Zapier integration, the app, how to work with localized address. Christian Mogensen woke up one day and said, screw that, I'm just going to fix it. And that's basically what happened. So now, on an entity's address, on a contact.address or a person.address property, you're going to get a localized address, or instead of that, sorry, person address, postal, and street. And you can go ahead and directly populate the properties that way. Easy? So here you can see by populating the person entity at personentity.address.localized field, you can still do it the old way if you want to. You don't have to change any of your existing code. It's just going to work. However, if you want to populate an address using the street.address1 field, by all means go ahead and do that. I do need to warn you though, if you do it the other way around, like on that last line, and you say personentity.address.localized field, and you populate the value that should be a zip code, and then you go ahead and populate the zip code again, and you save that, what do you think is going to happen? You might expect that the last property that was populated wins, 4321, but that would be wrong. Localized address overrides anything that's set inside the other properties. Okay? Just know that. So use one or the other, but not both. Sustainable customizations. We are all about customized and sustainable customizations. So this is me preaching. When you're writing code and you're doing integrations with SuperOffice, stay at the highest level possible. Lowest level on that ladder, if you will. When it comes to using external web APIs, stick to the service agents and the web API. These things are going to remain solid. They've remained solid and stable ever since I can remember. And configuration versioning. If you're going to be doing integrations at the lower level, get familiar with doing assembly bindings so that you can deploy your assemblies compiled with older versions of SuperOffice and have it seamlessly work inside newer versions of SuperOffice. This is the not fragile approach. This is the rock solid approach. Lastly, community efforts. Please check out our community efforts up on GitHub. We've got things like cross-messaging examples, continuous database examples that show you how to deploy continuous database solutions with just a few lines of code. There's an Angular project up there that I didn't get to show you today that uses our OpenID Connect library and our web APIs. Check that out. Our documentation is up there. If you don't like our documentation or you find that, we've had some community contributions to help out with the documentation, by all means, check it out and get credit for the submissions that you give us. Now, thanks to Skankup, we've got that CRM script library up there, and every time I see a great snippet of code that comes out on the forums, I expect one of you to snag it and put it up in that library on GitHub. If not, I probably will. Just going to say. Custom apps and examples on how to work with our custom apps in online. I need to update them because they are using the old workflow for login and not OpenID Connect, so those will be updated soon. And then obviously that Visual Studio Code demonstration that Dr. Hiwa-song showed us. Yeah. When it comes to the community forums, please do, when you ask questions and you need answers with useful answers, please provide useful questions. Give us some context in terms of what your problem is. Tell us how to reproduce it. Show some code. You just ask a single line of text without actually showing what you're doing. Provide some context that will give you much faster, better answers. With that, that's all I have for you. Thanks a lot for listening. Thanks for being awake.